Jesus told parables, sometimes to help people understand, sometimes to make them think. Last week in church, we told the parable of the small child in the rainforest, an invitation to be childlike in the way we embrace the way of God, with curiosity, with delight, even in the moments that aren't as we wish. Today it's what I'm calling the parable of the coming together and the silence. Or as Jesus, to use the language or the way of Jesus in the Gospels, maybe something like this. For the way of God is as if many people over thousands of years tell their stories of sacred presence and then stop to listen. Our parable is a story of 2024, and it's a big one, worldwide actually. Through technology, there are more words and images and videos available than ever before, and thus more stories. I'm pretty glad about that because it means I'm able to do this. But in one way, the distribution of stories is unequal because such technology is not available to all the world's people. But then again, sacred stories were around for thousands of years before the internet came along, before writing too, for that matter. Communities don't need technology to have sacred stories. Excuse me. People have always told stories and parables about their experience and their imagination of the divine presence around and beyond and yet among us. The storyteller whose way of faith we follow, Jesus, was not only a teller of stories, but he was a listener of stories too. He heard the stories of those around him, and he allowed them to touch his heart. A woman at a well in Samaria. A young man labelled the Gerasene demoniac. Or the children brought to hear him and meet him. Like Moses and Jeremiah and Ruth and all of the others of his tradition. Like Muhammad, like the Buddha, like Dr. Gandhara here in Australia, like Dr. King in the US, and so many others, Jesus looked at the world around him and saw here, the creative and divine presence. A presence beyond imagination and yet so intimate that he spoke of it as Abba, Father. In 2024, so many people and communities and nations even regard different as opposition or opposing. There is fear of the other. We remember that the opposite of love is not hate, it's fear. Hate emerges from fear. And this isn't new. Such polarising and tribalism has been part of human experience for as long as there has been human experience. And certainly it was an everyday part of life in Jesus' day. But it doesn't seem to have been his way. His was a ministry and a way of being that allowed different stories of God to sit together, rather than be threatened or dismissive of them. You might remember him saying at a couple of points, those who aren't against us are with us. So I believe that for us, the parable of the coming together of our stories is an important parable. It's an important part of the way of God in the world. But you may note that that's not all I said in the beginning. I began this witness by saying that Jesus might begin it like this. For the way of God is as if many people over thousands of years tell their stories of sacred presence and then stop to listen. To listen to the other stories so that we hear them. And listening to hear is quite different from listening to respond or to correct. And then to listen in the silence, listen together to the silence, knowing that there's depth and beauty and richness that can come when we stop talking. Silence can give space to reflect on the wisdom around us and within us, and also to listen and discover the limits of that wisdom. As Rowan Williams, former Archbishop of Canterbury, reminds us, and I quote, "A growing humanity, a maturing humanity is one that is prepared for silence, because it's prepared at important moments to say, I can't domesticate, I can't get on top of this." He goes on, in a small way, that's what happens when we seek to be truly and fully silent, or let ourselves be silenced by the mystery of God. We become a place where the mystery of God happens. And in the courage to be silent together in the face of that mystery, I believe we might encounter more deeply the presence of the Holy Spirit. In our joys, our tears, our fears, our hopes, our questions, our doubts, our insights, and our imaginings, holding us when the path is long or winding or dangerous, leading us, calling us. In church these last few weeks, I've suggested a few parables for the way of God, inviting us into sacred curiosity and imagination. They arise from my thoughts and my context, and I own that. But after each one, I've said that it may or may not speak directly to you as it did to me. I hope, though, that one or more of them may have encouraged you in reflecting on your parables and perhaps sharing them with others. That's the beauty of community in God. And I'd love to hear your parables of God's way. Because as I've said before, I'm pretty sure we all have them. So once again, I wonder, how might you finish this sentence today? For the way of God is as if. Blessings.